Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. We're talking about one of the most stimulating and the most informative uh, story in the Quran, which is that of the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Now, Yusuf alayhi salam is known because he has basically experienced all aspects of things that you and me expect to, right? So sometimes we expect to see, let's say, as a little boy or a little girl, we know some people who've been bullied, right? We know they've been bullied. We know some people who have jealousy, right? They face jealousy from other people. Sometimes it's people that are as part of their own family. We do know that from time to time, despite our best behavior, things just don't quite turn out in our favor, right? Sometimes we don't do well at school, etc., etc. Let's go back to the story where we left it. So I'm going to bring in just a few minutes for those who weren't here last time. Yusuf was born in a household where there were already 10 boys older than him. And after him, another son was born to Yusuf's dad, who is called Jacob or Yaqub in Arabic. The 10 older boys seemed to have a feeling that their dad cared more for this younger brother of theirs. So that's something that they always had at the back of their mind. And it kind of affected their behavior towards Yusuf. The second part of this is that they planned, unfortunately, and threw Yusuf in a well. Because they lived in a place where wells were there. We talked about wells. Wells are basically holes in the ground, which used to be, and some of you may still have well water where you live. Most of us have water coming to the tap, so we don't always know. But in those days, of course, there was no running water. You had to go to a well to get water. So Yusuf's brothers, because they were jealous of him, they threw him in a well. From there, he was picked up, and he was picked up by a caravan. And we talked about a caravan. A caravan is basically something like it's like a bunch of people who are traveling together, right? That's what caravan is. So once they had found this little boy, some people say he was 9. Some people say he was a bit younger, older. But let's just take a ballpark figure to say he was about 9 years old. Okay. So now when he was found, in those days, it was common to sell anybody like that, which means you didn't have to look for their family. You didn't have to worry about who they are, etc. You just basically took them like merchandise, like a bit like goods, right? It's sad, but that's how the people used to be. So there was nothing unusual. If somebody was found, they were just sold. So that's what happened to Yusuf. Now, Yusuf was a good-looking young boy. He was a very polite boy. But remember, you have to be known by people enough before people realize, oh, there is actually something very unique about you, right? He was a very intelligent young boy. But nobody knew this. People who picked him up were just like people who were just passing by. They found him. And they didn't care about whether he was intelligent or whether he was somebody who was a good kid, etc. They just wanted money. So what they did, as the slide says, they sold him, and this is the Quran, by the way. وَشَرَوْهُ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ وَشَرَوْهُ بِثَمَنٍ بَخْسٍ دَرَاهِمَ مَعْدُودَةٍ وَكَانُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الزَّاهِدِينَ. They sold him for a very small amount of price, a few dollars actually. Dirhams is just the currency they used to use, right? This whole story is taking place, by the way, somewhere near Palestine. So now, once he was he was sold in a family, and this is where the drama really begins. He's actually sold into a rich family. Okay. He actually finds himself a part of a rich family, not only a rich family, but actually it appears that the person who owns him, the if you like, the man of the house, he's actually a deputy prime minister. He's actually somebody who has a very prominent position in the government. So now you suddenly have Yusuf going from a very small, relatively humble beginnings. Imagine somebody came from a very small town and suddenly they find themselves in a big city, and they have all this hustle, bustle, all this activity, dozens of people running around doing things. Somebody's cooking, somebody's cleaning, somebody's buying the food, somebody's doing. I don't know if has any of you seen a castle? Has any of you been in a castle? Do you know what a castle is? home. It's a huge house, right? So there may be dozens of rooms in there. There may be 2 dozen rooms in there. We don't know. We don't know how many rooms there are in this place where Yusuf ended up. But now, why am I telling you this? Because it kind of gives you an idea what kind of situation Yusuf has to deal with, right? From being inside at the bottom of a well to being sold, and from being a house where there were 10 of his older brothers, one of his younger brothers was called Benjamin. We haven't mentioned him much. Benjamin, we haven't mentioned him much. But suddenly Yusuf finds himself in a huge castle. Not only that, but now even more excitement. Here, he suddenly realizes there is actually a woman who has, is the wife of the, if you like, the boss, the guy who owns this castle, the guy who's the deputy prime minister of this country, finance minister. We don't know for sure, but he was in a big, prominent position. Okay, so suddenly we find her interested in Yusuf. Now, you might say, really? Why? Well, in those days, scandals were very, very easy, right? People who are rich, people who have a lot of money, people who kind of, if you like, at the top of the food chain, they kind of have money, they have power, they have huge homes, they probably have dozens of horses. We don't know, that wasn't mentioned. They have, they have basically everything. So what they sometimes think is, and unfortunately this is sometimes, I'm not saying all people are like that who have money and who have homes, etc. I'm just saying some people tend to think I can do whatever I want, right? I don't have to answer. I don't have to worry about what it is I'm doing. I don't have to answer to anybody. Who do we consider? Because they realize, okay, nobody's watching, but guess what? Allah is watching. Allah knows. Allah has definitely noticed what I've done. Not only that, but now it's going to be recorded. It's going to be there. So I better either return the thing. Well, best thing is really to just put that whatever I picked up back, and also to ask forgiveness, right? So anyway, so this is really where Yusuf finds himself. Yusuf finds himself in a situation where a rich woman in a big castle, where he's just a servant. In fact, he's a slave. You can imagine he's pretty scared what's going to happen next, but there's nothing he can do about it. He can't exactly call up, an 800 number to say, hey, I'm being harassed here. I'm being chased around. I'm already a slave. I've been sold for a very few amount, dollars. I want to go home. He can't do any of that. He's actually stuck in the situation. Now, what happens from here is actually this situation deteriorates to some extent, because unfortunately okay, so what happens from now is that this story that the woman or the wife of this rich man is kind of showing an interest in him, it starts to become a scandal, which means stuff starts going around. People who are calling it, there was no phones those days, but people talk, right? People spoke to each other. So people started to share this knowledge that the wife of this rich man is up to no good with this new, or this slave of hers, right? So the story started going around. Now, I want to tell you all that Yusuf alayhi salam, he's a prophet of God, right? But he's not yet the prophet of God. Who can remember his dad's name? His name is Yaqub. So now I want you again to think carefully. Where is Yusuf learned his manners? Where has Yusuf figured out what is right and what's wrong? How does Yusuf know I should not be doing what I'm being asked to do, right? Where does Yusuf learn this? And of course, the answer is he learned it with his mom and dad, right? They told him what is good and what's not good, what's right and what's not right, what does Allah want from us, etc. But the woman and the man, and sorry, the environment, the society where Yusuf has ended up isn't necessarily that kind of society. Like I said earlier, they feel that if they have money, they have position, they have power, well, this is a servant. We'll do what we want with him. So what starts going around the city is this rumor that Yusuf's madame, or his boss, his lady boss, is kind of having this interest in him. And of course, this kind of information is, negative. It produces a certain amount of stress. It produces anxiety. And so Yusuf's uh, boss, or the madam of the house, we are told her name was Zulaikha. It's not in the Quran anywhere, but it's something that's been narrated in the stories. What she did was, because they were spreading all this stuff about her, she said, I'll show you. So the photo you see on the screen, as you can see, there's some fruits, there's a knife, and there's a person whose fingers are bleeding. Now you might be wondering, what is the connection between these three things? What the connection of this is, Yusuf's boss, the lady boss, to show her friends who were spreading this rumor, excuse me, about her, she invites them to her castle. And now she hasn't told them why they're invited, but it's like a party, right? So it's no big deal. So they invite her. She invites them. There's a few of them come, only ladies. And when they come, she kind of sits them around this big table, and she places fruit, and she places knives. And so, of course, what do people do with knives and fruits? They eat them. So she asks them to eat the fruit, or at least that's the implication. And then, while they have that knife in their hand, she asks Yusuf to come in. And I don't know if I told you, but Yusuf was an extremely handsome man. In fact, his beauty, his handsome appearance is described in the Quran. And in fact, it's said that he is one of the most, if not the most, the Prophet ﷺ, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Of course, he was good looking, not just good looking, he was an extremely good looking man. But Yusuf alayhi salam, peace be upon him, is described as one of the most handsome looking men ever born. So when he walks in, all these ladies who are sitting, cutting their fruit, they kind of look up to him, right? Because I don't know if you've been in a gathering where somebody who's very impressive, very awe-inspiring, very captivating enters the room, right? You have a tendency to look up to say, wow, who's that, right? So as they look up, they notice his handsome appearance. Mind you, he's not dressed in any, party dress or anything. He's just dressed in very regular, ordinary clothes. If anything, you can expect that a servant or a slave probably didn't have very many good clothes, right? But his appearance and his dignity and his charm is unbelievably captivating, right? So they're all looking at him, and guess what? They cut themselves.
Trying to
Yusuf
talk.
has been in this situation where he didn't really have anything to do with what has happened so far. But during this party, pretty much all the ladies cut their fingers while they were watching Yusuf. This is the nature of this young man. He's so good looking, and he's so awe inspiring. He's so captivating. Nobody can really control themselves, and they keep looking at him. And of course, in the process, they cut themselves. The purpose of all this is the wife of Yusuf's boss wants to show them, you are making such a big deal about it. You're spreading all these news about me. But look at what happened to you. Look at what happened to you. When he just walked in, you couldn't even stop looking at him. And you were looking at him so much that you cut yourself. After this event, guess what happens? The boss, actual boss of Yusuf, finds out about all this, right? It is his castle, it is his home, and he's a big guy in the government. So all this news is filtering through to him. And of course, he starts to check out what's going on. One thing that I haven't said in the story here is, before this party, actually, Yusuf was being chased one day by this woman, and he was running away from her. So she was trying to grab him, and she tore his shirt from the back in the process. But this was found out. So the whole incident became a huge, if you like, scandal, right? People are trying to figure out what's going on with this servant, this slave, and the wife of the boss, etc., etc. So all kind of stuff is going around. So the boss of Yusuf inquired and tried to figure out what happened. And one of his friends said, look, check the slave's shirt. If he says he was running away and your wife was chasing him, if his shirt is torn from the back, then he's right. But if he was attacking her and she was trying to defend herself, then his shirt should be torn from the front. And guess where the shirt was torn from? The shirt was torn from the back. So Yusuf's boss figured out very quickly what's going on. So now, unfortunately, because Yusuf is a slave, he's not got very many, if you write friends, there's nobody supporting his story. He's just basically standing up, trying to defend himself. I didn't do it, I didn't do it. But nobody's listening, right? Not only that, but to make things worse, they actually put him in jail. They actually throw him in jail, which I think is amazing considering he hadn't done anything. And this is why I'm trying to tell you all that sometimes when you are a good guy, you actually face all this unfortunate situation, right? So Yusuf finds himself in the jail. This is, I've just shown you a cell. I'm not saying this is his cell. This is not necessarily where he was. But can you imagine to be locked up for something you didn't do? All he has done is he's been caught up in a situation which was not of his making. Now, Yusuf does not, guys, despite all this, Yusuf doesn't become depressed at all. Yusuf does not cry. He doesn't say it's so unfair. I'm going to get them when I come out of here. None of this. He just asks God, Ya Allah, please, please help me protect myself. I don't want to be in this home where all this bad stuff is being done to me. I really want to be, I'd much rather go to jail. So actually, when Yusuf ends up in jail, part of it is because he asked Allah to put him in a situation where he could be saved from what those women were planning for him, right? They were not planning good things for him. They were planning bad things for him. So Yusuf ends up basically in jail. Now, in jail, guess what happens? Now he meets up with two prisoners. So prisoners can figure out kind of over a period of time that he's a good guy, right? Because prisoners almost always know if they've done something wrong. They're not in prison for no reason, right? So two of the prisoners come to him and one of them says, we know you're a good guy, right? They say, we know you're a good guy. Now, how they know, of course, I'm not saying how they did, but they kind of figured out this is a good guy, right? Because Yusuf was maybe from his looks an honorable, dignified man, right? He was a dignified man. So when you're dignified, when you are not doing bad stuff, people can tell that you're a good guy, right? Because you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't use bad words, you respect your parents, you tell the truth, all that stuff, right? So when you are like that, people respect. So one of the persons, the two prisoners come to him and they said, look, we actually had a dream. What's the dream? One of them says, I saw myself extracting wine. Now, extracting wine in those days was considered to be something that was very profitable, right? People made wine from grapes, as you can see in this picture. So he said, I see myself in my dream extracting wine. And the other prisoner, he says, I saw myself actually as somebody who's standing and there are birds that are eating from bread that is on my head. Just like he says, I also had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread, and the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, right? But the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. So these are the 2 dreams. Now, Yusuf, peace be upon him, is actually an expert on dreams. Remember, he saw that dream about 10 stars and sun and the moon bowing down to him. That was him also. And his dad had told him this should not be told to your brothers because they're not going to like it. I don't know if you guys remember it. That's what we talked about on Tuesday, right? So here, these 2 dreams, Joseph or Yusuf actually tells them the person who is extracting wine, this person will actually be released. Now, why were these 2 people in the prison? The reason they were in the prison was because they were trying to do some kind of, if you like, planning to overthrow the king. So they had a bad plan. Now, it was not proven, but it was suspected that they were doing that, right? So that's why the king had said, I'm not going to allow these 2 guys to get away with it. So they were actually being tried, but they were in the prison at the meanwhile. So Yusuf said to them, the one who was seeing extracting wine, he said, you are going to be acquitted, which means you're going to be released because you're innocent. The other guy who actually had birds eating from his head, remember the second dream, the one that you see on the picture? Yusuf told him, unfortunately, it looks like you're not going to make it. You're actually going to be crucified. That's how you used to be executed those days, which means you will be killed by the king because you actually had taken part in overthrowing him, which means case will be proven against you, but not against your friend. So now these two basically are going to go, and actually, that's exactly what happened. One of them was released, the other one was actually executed and killed. And that is the end of our story for tonight. For next week, inshallah, next Tuesday, what I'm going to talk about is, inshallah, how Yusuf actually went on to interpret the dream of the king. I want you to think about what happens next. Will he be released? Will he actually have the people who were responsible for him being in jail actually face the consequences of what they did to him? Will that be the case?